The year was 2008 and the world was falling apart. Banks were closing, people were losing their homes, and finding a job felt impossible. For Rachel Williams, a 28-year-old woman with a fresh business degree and big dreams, the economic crash hit like a brick wall. She had spent 4 years studying hard, taking out loans she couldn't afford, all believing that her education would open doors. She thought companies would be fighting over someone with her skills, but reality was cruel. Every job application ended the same way. Rejection after rejection after rejection. Rachel lived in a small apartment with her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, and her mother, who was sick with diabetes. The medical bills kept piling up, and the rent was due every month whether she had money or not. Her savings account, which was never big to begin with, was now completely empty. She had applied to over 200 companies. Marketing manager, financial analyst, business consultant. She tried everything. But every interview seemed to go the same way. She would walk into those fancy office buildings, wearing her one good suit that she bought with her last credit card, and she could see it in their eyes. They had already made up their minds before she even opened her mouth. One particularly cold Tuesday morning, Rachel was sitting at her kitchen table with a stack of bills and her laptop. Her phone rang, and for a moment her heart jumped. Maybe this was it, maybe someone finally wanted to hire her. But it was just another automated message about her student loan payments. That's when she saw it. A small ad in the local newspaper that someone had left on the bus. Night janitor position available, Pinnacle Industries. The pay was low, very low, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. Pinnacle Industries was one of those huge companies that everyone in the city knew about. They had this massive glass building downtown with their name in big letters at the top. Rachel had actually applied there twice for management positions. Both times, she never even got a call back. But now she was applying to clean their toilets. The interview for the janitor job was different from all the others. The supervisor, a tired-looking man named Bob, barely looked at her resume. He just wanted to know if she could work nights, if she was reliable, and if she could start immediately. "The pay is minimum wage," he said, not even looking up from his clipboard. "You'll work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. You'll be cleaning offices, emptying trash, mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms. It's not glamorous work." Rachel wanted to tell him about her degree, about her business knowledge, about all the things she could do for this company. But she just nodded and said, "I can start tonight." Her first night at Pinnacle Industries was eye-opening. The building that looked so impressive during the day felt completely different at night. The halls were empty, the lights were dimmed, and her footsteps echoed as she pushed her cleaning cart from floor to floor. She started on the first floor and worked her way up. Each floor had dozens of offices, and each office told a story. Some were neat and organized, others looked like a tornado had hit them. But what caught Rachel's attention wasn't the mess. It was all the papers. Financial reports were scattered on desks. Strategic plans were left open on computer screens. Important documents were thrown in trash cans like they meant nothing. Rachel couldn't help but look. Her business education kicked in automatically, and she started noticing things. The company was spending too much money on consultants who weren't delivering results. They were investing in markets that were clearly declining. They were making the kind of basic mistakes that she had learned about in her first-year business classes. At first, she tried to ignore it. She was just there to clean, not to analyze their business. But every night she saw more problems. Contracts that made no sense, budget reports that didn't add up, investment strategies that seemed designed to lose money. The executives who worked in these offices treated her like she was invisible. Sometimes they would stay late, having meetings while she cleaned around them. They would talk about sensitive company matters, discuss upcoming deals, argue about budgets, all while she emptied their trash cans and wiped down their tables. It was like she wasn't even there. "The quarterly numbers are terrible," she heard one executive say to another as she cleaned their conference room. "But we can't let the shareholders know how bad it really is." "Just blame it on market conditions," the other one replied. "Everyone's struggling right now. They'll believe it." Rachel kept cleaning, but her mind was racing. These people were making decisions that affected thousands of employees, thousands of shareholders, and they seemed to have no idea what they were doing. One night, about 3 months into the job, Rachel was cleaning the CEO's office when she found a report in his trash can. It was a detailed analysis of the company's financial situation, and it painted a very different picture than what they were telling the public. The company was in serious trouble, but instead of fixing the problems, they were just hiding them. Rachel took the report home and studied it carefully. She cross-referenced it with the company's public financial statements, and the differences were shocking. They were lying to their investors, to their employees, to everyone. But what could she do? She was just a janitor. Who would listen to her? That's when she had an idea. She started taking notes during her shifts, not stealing documents. She would never do that, but remembering conversations, noting patterns, understanding the bigger picture. She began studying the company from the inside, learning things that most employees would never know. She would sit in empty conference rooms during her breaks, using her phone to research the company's public filings and comparing them with what she was seeing internally. The more she learned, the more concerned she became. Pinnacle Industries was a sinking ship, but the people steering it either didn't know or didn't care. They were so focused on short-term profits and their own bonuses that they couldn't see the long-term disaster they were creating. Rachel started writing detailed reports at home, analyzing the company's problems and suggesting solutions. She knew these strategies could work because she had studied them in school and seen similar situations in her textbooks. But she was just a janitor. What good would her ideas do? The executives continued to ignore her presence. They would have private conversations right in front of her, discussing company secrets like she wasn't even human. They never asked her name, never said thank you when she cleaned their offices, never acknowledged that she existed. But Rachel was watching. Rachel was learning, and Rachel was getting angry. Every night she would come home to her small apartment, where her daughter was sleeping and her mother was struggling with her illness. The medical bills kept coming, the rent kept increasing, and her janitor's salary barely covered their basic needs. But during those long nights at Pinnacle Industries, pushing her cart through those empty hallways, Rachel Williams was getting an education that no business school could provide. She was learning how a major corporation really worked, seeing the problems from the inside, and understanding exactly what needed to be fixed. She just didn't know yet that she would be the one to fix it. The executives at Pinnacle Industries thought they knew everything. They thought their degrees from expensive schools and their years of experience made them untouchable. They thought the woman in the janitor's uniform who cleaned their offices every night was nobody important. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As Rachel finished her shift each morning, walking out of that impressive glass building into the early morning sunlight, she carried with her more than just the satisfaction of an honest night's work. She carried knowledge. She carried understanding. And slowly, very slowly, she was beginning to carry a plan. The invisible woman was about to become the most powerful person in the building. She just didn't know it yet. By her 4th year at Pinnacle Industries, Rachel had become like a ghost that haunted the office halls. She knew every corner of that building, every executive's habits, and most importantly, every terrible decision they were making. What started as simple observations had turned into something much bigger. The company was bleeding money, but not in the way most people would think. On paper, everything looked fine. The quarterly reports showed steady profits, the annual meetings painted a rosy picture, and the stock price remained stable. But Rachel saw the truth behind the numbers, and it was ugly. She watched as the board members gave million-dollar contracts to their golf buddies for projects that never got finished. She saw them approve expenses for private jets while laying off hard-working employees in the lower departments. She witnessed them manipulate budget numbers to hide their mistakes and blame good people for problems they didn't create. But the thing that bothered Rachel the most was how smart these executives thought they were. They would sit in their fancy, leather chairs, making decisions that affected thousands of families, and they had no idea what they were doing. Meanwhile, she could see solutions to their problems that were so obvious it was almost painful. One night, while cleaning the marketing director's office, Rachel found a proposal that made her stomach turn. The company was planning to spend $5 million on an advertising campaign that was guaranteed to fail. She had seen similar campaigns crash and burn in her business studies, and she knew exactly why this one wouldn't work. That's when Rachel decided to do something that would change everything. She went home that night and wrote her first anonymous report. She spent hours crafting a detailed analysis of why the marketing campaign would fail, what they should do instead, and how they could save money while getting better results. Researched every claim, double-checked every number, and made sure her suggestions were practical and achievable. The next night, she slipped the report under the marketing director's door with a simple note. From a concerned employee who wants this company to succeed. Nothing happened for a week. Rachel almost forgot about it. But then, during one of her cleaning rounds, she overheard the marketing director talking to his assistant. "Someone sent me this analysis of our new campaign," he was saying. "I don't know who wrote it, but they're absolutely right. We need to change our entire approach." Rachel's heart was racing. Someone had actually listened to her ideas. Someone had taken her seriously, even though they didn't know who she was. The marketing campaign was redesigned using her suggestions, and it became one of the most successful campaigns in the company's history. The marketing director got a big bonus and a promotion. Rachel got nothing, but she didn't care. She had proved to herself that her ideas had value, that success gave her confidence to do more. Over the next few months, she started sending anonymous reports to different department heads. She analyzed their budget problems, suggested better suppliers, identified areas where they were wasting money, and proposed solutions that any smart business person would implement. Some managers ignored her reports, but others started paying attention. The operations manager implemented her cost-saving suggestions and reduced expenses by 30%. The human resources director used her advice to improve employee satisfaction and reduce turnover. The finance team followed her recommendations and caught several accounting errors that could have caused major problems. But while some middle managers were benefiting from her insights, the executives at the top continued making the same destructive decisions. They took credit for all the improvements happening in the lower departments, while creating bigger problems with their own choices. Rachel realized that anonymous reports weren't enough. If she wanted to make real change, she needed to understand the legal side of business. She needed to know exactly what these executives were doing wrong and how to stop them. That's when she made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone who knew her. She decided to go to law school. Her daughter Lily was now 11 years old and old enough to understand that money was tight. Her mother's health was getting worse and the medical bills were piling up. But Rachel knew that education was the key to changing their situation permanently. She enrolled in night classes at the local community college to start her pre-law requirements. Every night after her janitorial shift, instead of going home to sleep, she would drive across town to attend classes. She would sit in those classrooms at 7 in the morning, still wearing her work uniform, trying to stay awake while learning about constitutional law and legal writing. The other students looked at her strangely. Here was this tired-looking woman in a janitor's uniform, taking notes alongside college kids who were half her age. Some professors questioned whether she belonged there, but Rachel didn't care what anyone thought. She had a goal, and nothing was going to stop her. She would study during her cleaning shifts, hiding textbooks in her supply cart. While emptying trash cans in executive offices, she would have her law books open, reading about corporate regulations and shareholder rights. The executives never noticed. To them, she was still invisible. The workload was brutal. Cleaning offices all night, attending classes in the morning, studying in the afternoon, and trying to spend time with her daughter and help care for her mother. There were nights when Rachel felt like she couldn't do it anymore. She was exhausted, broke, and sometimes wondered if she was crazy for thinking she could change anything. But then she would overhear another board meeting where they discussed cutting employee benefits while giving themselves raises. Or she would see another wasteful decision that would cost the company millions of dollars, and she would remember why she was doing this. During her 5th year at Pinnacle, Rachel witnessed something that made her realize just how corrupt the leadership really was. She was cleaning the boardroom after a late-night meeting when she found notes that had been left behind. The executives were planning to sell a major division of the company to a firm owned by the chairman's brother for far less than it was worth. The deal would make the chairman's family rich while destroying thousands of jobs and cheating the shareholders out of millions of dollars. It was exactly the kind of thing that should be illegal, and Rachel was pretty sure it was. She researched corporate law and found that what they were planning was indeed illegal. It was called self-dealing, and it violated their fiduciary duty to the shareholders. But proving it would require evidence, and getting that evidence would be dangerous. Rachel started being extra careful during her cleaning rounds. She began documenting everything she saw and heard, building a case piece by piece. She learned about securities law, corporate governance, and shareholder rights. She studied famous cases where corrupt executives had been brought down by people who refused to stay silent. Meanwhile, she continued sending her anonymous reports to middle managers. Her suggestions were making real improvements throughout the company. Productivity was up, costs were down, and employee morale was improving in every department that followed her advice. But the executives kept making terrible decisions. They approved more wasteful projects, hired more of their incompetent friends, and continued treating the company like their personal piggy bank. The contrast between the improving lower levels and the destructive upper management became more obvious every month. Rachel also started doing something else during this time. Whenever she had a few extra dollars, she would buy shares of Pinnacle Industries stock. The shares were cheap because the company's performance was declining, but Rachel knew that with proper management, the company could be incredibly valuable. She opened a brokerage account and started purchasing small amounts of stock every month. 5 shares here, 10 shares there. It wasn't much, but she was building a position. She was becoming a shareholder, which meant she had legal rights that couldn't be ignored. By her 6th year, Rachel had earned her associate degree and was accepted into a law program. She had also accumulated nearly 1,000 shares of company stock and had documented hundreds of examples of executive misconduct. The executives still treated her like furniture. They still discussed sensitive information in front of her like she didn't exist. They still had no idea that the quiet woman pushing the cleaning cart was building a legal case that could destroy their careers. But Rachel was patient. She had learned that real change takes time, and rushing would only give them a chance to cover their tracks. She continued her studies, continued documenting their mistakes, and continued preparing for the day when she would finally reveal herself. The woman they thought was nobody was becoming someone very dangerous to their corrupt little empire. She was gaining knowledge, gathering evidence, and building the legal foundation to challenge them. Every night, as she cleaned their offices and listened to their careless conversations, Rachel was getting stronger. She was learning their weaknesses, understanding their crimes, and preparing for a battle they didn't even know was coming. The invisible janitor was about to become the most powerful person in the building. And when that day came, none of them would see it coming. 8 years had passed since Rachel first walked into Pinnacle Industries wearing a janitor's uniform. Now she had something the executives would never expect, a law degree and a license to practice. But she still showed up every night at 10 o'clock, pushing her cleaning cart through those familiar hallways, listening to conversations that would soon come back to haunt the people having them. The company's situation had gotten much worse. What Rachel had predicted years ago was finally coming true. Pinnacle Industries was in serious financial trouble, but the board members were still living in their fantasy world, refusing to admit their mistakes. The stock price had dropped by 60% over the past 2 years. Major clients were leaving for competitors. Employee layoffs happened every few months, and the company's reputation in the industry was falling apart. Yet somehow, the executives kept giving themselves bonuses and acting like everything was fine. Rachel had watched it all happen, documenting every bad decision, every wasteful expense, every lie they told to shareholders. Her collection of evidence had grown into boxes full of notes, copies of documents, and recordings of conversations. She had built the most complete picture of corporate corruption that anyone could imagine. But Rachel wasn't working alone anymore. Over the years, she had quietly reached out to other shareholders who were frustrated with the company's performance. She started with small investors like herself, people who had bought stock hoping for a good return, but instead watched their investments lose value year after year. Her first contact was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had invested her retirement savings in Pinnacle stock because she believed in the company's mission. Mrs. Chen had lost nearly half her investment and was furious about the executive's behavior. When Rachel explained what she had witnessed from the inside, Mrs. Chen was eager to help. Then there was David Rodriguez, a teacher who had bought Pinnacle stock for his daughter's college fund. He had watched the value drop steadily while reading about executive bonuses in the company's annual reports. He couldn't understand how the leadership could reward themselves while the company was failing. Rachel also connected with the Johnson family, who had inherited Pinnacle stock from their grandfather. They had been shareholders for over 20 years and remembered when the company was well managed and profitable. They were disgusted by what it had become under the current leadership. One by one, Rachel built a network of small shareholders who together owned nearly 30% of the company. They were all angry, frustrated, and ready to fight for change, but they needed someone with the knowledge and legal skills to lead them. They needed Rachel. The turning point came during Rachel's 9th year at the company. She was cleaning the boardroom after what she thought was just another routine meeting when she overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. The chairman was on the phone with someone, and he was laughing, actually laughing about how they had fooled the shareholders in the latest quarterly report. "The numbers look terrible," he was saying. "But we managed to spin it so it sounds like we're making progress. These people will believe anything as long as we use the right words." Then she heard something even worse. The board was planning to sell their personal stock holdings before the next quarterly report came out, because they knew the real numbers would be devastating. They were going to dump their shares and leave regular shareholders holding worthless paper. This wasn't just bad management anymore. This was fraud. They were deliberately deceiving investors while protecting themselves from losses. Rachel knew that this kind of insider trading was a serious crime, and she finally had proof of it. That night, Rachel went home and made a decision that would change everything. She was done watching from the shadows. It was time to act. She filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission, providing detailed evidence of the executive's illegal activities. She sent copies of her documentation to financial journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. She reached out to institutional investors who owned large blocks of Pinnacle stock, explaining what was really happening inside the company. But Rachel's biggest move was preparing for the annual shareholders meeting that was scheduled for the following month. As a licensed attorney and a shareholder herself, she had the legal right to attend and speak at the meeting. More importantly, she had the right to nominate new board members and call for votes to remove the existing ones. The law was on her side, but she needed to be smart about how she used it. Rachel spent weeks preparing her presentation, organizing her evidence, and coordinating with her coalition of shareholders. She knew she would only get one chance to make her case, and it had to be perfect. Meanwhile, the executives had no idea what was coming. They continued their regular routines, making bad decisions and treating Rachel like she was invisible. Just the week before the shareholders' meeting, she overheard the CEO telling his assistant that he wasn't worried about the meeting because none of those small shareholders ever show up anyway, if only he knew. Rachel also used this time to reach out to the company's employees, particularly the middle managers who had benefited from her anonymous suggestions over the years. She didn't reveal her identity, but she let them know that changes were coming, and that honest, hardworking people would be protected. Some of these managers had suspected that their anonymous advisor was someone with inside access to the company, but none of them had guessed it was the night janitor. When Rachel finally revealed herself, their shock quickly turned to admiration and support. The operations manager, who had implemented Rachel's cost-saving measures and improved his department's efficiency by 40%, immediately offered to testify about the positive changes that could happen with proper leadership. The human resources director, who had used Rachel's advice to solve several workplace problems, agreed to document how the current executives were damaging employee morale and productivity. Even the marketing director, whose career had been launched by that first anonymous report Rachel had written years ago, stepped forward to support her cause. These middle managers represented the heart of the company, the people who actually did the work while the executives got the credit. As the shareholders' meeting approached, Rachel felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had spent years preparing for this moment, but now that it was almost here, the reality of what she was about to do hit her. She was about to walk into a room full of powerful, wealthy executives and challenge their authority. She was going to accuse them of crimes in front of their peers, the media, and hundreds of shareholders. She was risking everything on the belief that truth and justice would win over money and connections. The night before the meeting, Rachel worked her final shift as a janitor at Pinnacle Industries. She pushed her cart through those familiar hallways one last time, thinking about everything that had brought her to this point. She thought about her daughter Lily, now 18 and about to start college with the scholarship Rachel had worked so hard to earn for her. She thought about her mother, whose medical bills had finally been paid off thanks to Rachel's careful saving and budgeting over the years. She thought about all the employees who had lost their jobs because of the executives' bad decisions. She thought about the shareholders who had trusted the company with their life savings and watched it disappear. She thought about the customers who had been let down by declining product quality and poor service. Tomorrow, she would speak for all of them. As Rachel finished her shift and walked out of the Pinnacle Industries building for the last time as an employee, she felt a sense of completion. The invisible woman was about to become impossible to ignore. The janitor was about to become the boss. She had turned herself from a desperate job seeker into a licensed attorney, from a powerless observer into a shareholder advocate, from an invisible employee into the leader of a movement for change. The executives thought they were untouchable. They thought their wealth and connections would protect them from consequences. They thought the woman who had cleaned their offices for nearly a decade was nobody important. Tomorrow, they would learn how wrong they were. Tomorrow, Rachel Williams would walk into that boardroom not to clean it but to clean house. The morning of the annual shareholders' meeting arrived with clear blue skies, as if the universe knew that justice was about to be served. Rachel stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her best business suit. It was a far cry from the janitor's uniform she had worn for nearly 10 years in this same building. Her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her briefcase. Inside were copies of every document, every recording, every piece of evidence she had collected over the years. This briefcase contained the truth that would change everything. Lily hugged her before she left. "I'm proud of you, Mom," her daughter said. "No matter what happens today, you're the bravest person I know." Rachel's mother, now healthier thanks to better medical care they could finally afford, squeezed her hand. "Go show them who you really are," she whispered. The drive to Pinnacle Industries felt surreal. Rachel had made this trip thousands of times, but always at night, always as the invisible cleaning woman. Today she was driving there in broad daylight as an attorney, a shareholder and the leader of a movement that was about to shake the company to its core. When she arrived at the building, Rachel could see that something was different. There were more cars in the parking lot than usual. News vans were parked across the street. Word had gotten out that this wasn't going to be an ordinary shareholders meeting. Rachel had spent weeks coordinating with her coalition of shareholders, and they had all shown up. Mrs. Chen was there with her adult children who had driven her from across the state. David Rodriguez arrived with a folder full of documentation about his losses. The Johnson family came as a group, representing 3 generations of shareholders who were fed up with the corruption, but it wasn't just the small shareholders. Some of the institutional investors had sent representatives. A few financial journalists were setting up cameras. Even some current employees were there, using their right as shareholders to attend the meeting. The executives had expected maybe 50 people to show up. Instead, over 300 shareholders packed into the hotel conference room where the meeting was being held. Rachel watched from the back as the board members filed onto the stage. Chairman Williams looked confident and relaxed. CEO Thompson was checking his phone, probably thinking about his afternoon golf game. The other board members were chatting casually, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. The meeting started normally. Chairman Williams gave his usual speech about how the company was navigating challenging market conditions, and positioning for future growth. It was the same meaningless corporate language Rachel had heard him practice. In his office late at night, then came the financial report. CFO Martinez presented numbers that painted a much rosier picture than reality. Rachel listened to him describe cost-cutting measures as strategic restructuring and declining revenue as market adjustment. She had heard these lies being crafted in the boardroom, and now she was watching them being delivered to trusting shareholders. When the formal presentation ended, Chairman Williams asked if there were any questions from shareholders. Usually 1 or 2 people might ask soft questions that the executives could easily answer. Williams was clearly expecting another quiet, manageable meeting. That's when Rachel stood up. "I have some questions," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Williams looked annoyed. He probably thought she was just another disgruntled small shareholder who would ask one question and sit down. "Please state your name and your question," he said dismissively. "My name is Rachel Williams," she said, walking toward the front of the room. "I own 1,247 shares of Pinnacle Industries stock, and I have been an employee of this company for nearly 10 years. She could see confusion on the executives' faces. The name sounded familiar, but they couldn't place her. Then recognition began to dawn, and their expressions changed from confusion to shock to panic. "I believe some of you know me," Rachel continued, "though you've never really seen me. For the past 10 years, I have worked as a night janitor in your corporate headquarters. I have cleaned your offices, emptied your trash cans, and listened to your conversations. And what I have seen and heard has convinced me that this entire board of directors must be removed immediately." The room erupted. Shareholders started talking excitedly among themselves. The executives on stage looked like they had seen a ghost. Chairman Williams tried to regain control, banging his gavel and shouting for order. But Rachel wasn't finished. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Over the past 10 years," she said, "I have documented systematic mismanagement, waste, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty by this board. I have evidence of self-dealing, insider trading, and deliberate deception of shareholders. I have recordings of conversations where board members laugh about fooling investors and discuss selling their own stock before bad news becomes public." She began presenting her evidence methodically. Financial records showing money being funneled to companies owned by board members' relatives. Recordings of executives discussing how to hide losses from shareholders. Documentation of expensive perks and bonuses being approved while the company laid off thousands of workers. The room was completely silent except for Rachel's voice. Even the executives had stopped trying to interrupt her. They knew that everything she was saying was true, and they knew she had the evidence to prove it. "This company could be profitable and successful," Rachel continued. "I have seen the talent and dedication of the employees at every level. I have identified numerous opportunities for growth and improvement, but none of that can happen as long as this corrupt leadership remains in place." She turned to address the shareholders directly. "You have trusted these people with your investments, your retirement funds, your children's college money. They have repaid that trust by treating your company as their personal piggy bank. They have made decisions that benefit themselves while destroying value for everyone else." Chairman Williams finally found his voice. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "We don't have to listen to accusations from a disgruntled janitor." Rachel smiled. "You're right about one thing," she said. "You don't have to listen to a janitor, but you do have to listen to a licensed attorney, a shareholder, and the representative of a coalition that controls 32% of this company's stock." The executives' lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. They knew that Rachel had followed all the proper legal procedures. As a shareholder and attorney, she had every right to speak at this meeting and make formal motions. "I move for the immediate removal of the entire board of directors," Rachel announced. "I nominate myself and 6 other shareholders to serve as interim board members until a proper election can be held." The motion was seconded immediately by Mrs. Chen, then by David Rodriguez, then by dozens of other shareholders throughout the room. What followed was the most dramatic corporate vote in the company's history. One by one, shareholders stood up to voice their support for Rachel's motion. The institutional investors, who had been silent during the presentation, announced that they were voting their large blocks of stock in favor of the change. The final tally wasn't even close. Over 80% of the shares represented at the meeting voted to remove the existing board and install Rachel's interim leadership team. Chairman Williams tried one last desperate move. "This is illegal," he shouted. "We'll fight this in court." Rachel looked at him calmly. "Please do," she said. "I have copies of all my evidence ready for the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and any court that wants to see them. I think you'll find that fighting this will only make things worse for you." The room erupted in applause as the old board members gathered their things and walked out in defeat. Some of them were already on their phones with their lawyers. Others looked stunned, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. But Rachel wasn't celebrating yet. She knew that removing the corrupt leadership was just the first step. Now came the hard work of actually fixing the company. Over the next 18 months, Rachel proved that her years of observation and analysis had been worth it. She implemented the cost-saving measures she had identified during her night's cleaning offices. She brought in ethical leaders to replace the corrupt executives. She restored transparency in financial reporting and rebuilt trust with investors. The changes were dramatic. Employee morale improved when people saw that good work was being rewarded instead of punished. Customers started coming back when product quality improved. The stock price tripled as investors regained confidence in the company's leadership. Rachel kept her promise to never forget where she came from. She created scholarships for working-class students pursuing business degrees. She established mentorship programs that gave employees at all levels opportunities to advance, based on merit rather than connections. Most importantly, she changed the company culture from one of secrecy and self-interest to one of transparency and shared success. Board meetings were recorded and made available to shareholders. Executive compensation was tied to company performance. Employees were encouraged to speak up about problems instead of being silenced. The woman who had been invisible for 10 years had become the most visible leader in corporate America. Business schools began teaching case studies about her transformation of Pinnacle Industries. Other companies started adopting her management practices. But Rachel never forgot the lessons she learned during those long nights pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways. She kept her old janitor's uniform framed in her office, not as a reminder of where she came from, but as a symbol of the power of persistence, observation, and believing in yourself, even when nobody else does. The executives who had treated her like furniture were gone, some facing criminal charges for their illegal activities. The shareholders who had trusted Rachel with their investments were rewarded with returns they never thought possible. The employees who had suffered under corrupt leadership finally had a company they could be proud to work for. And Rachel Williams, who had started as a desperate single mother willing to clean toilets to feed her family, had become proof that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone thinks has no power at all.